Hello, everyone. Today to be reacting to a viewer's request. So this video is requested by Hot Space. Thank you for recommending me new videos to watch. Highly appreciate your comment. So this is about the story of Ted Bundy. Let me read the title to be clear. Photos of Ted Bundy recently surfaced, and they have big stories you should hear. The video is made by Top5 Unknowns. Recently surfaced. I don't know if it is just a clickbait or not, but let's find out. Okay, let's continue.
Ted Bundy is a notorious serial criminal that took the lives of at least 30 confirmed victims from 1974 to 1978. He's become a household name and has been referenced to in an uncountable number of various medias, and even serves as the perfect example of a textbook psychopath. A very well-known fact about Bundy, and psychopaths in general, is that he was actually a very outgoing and well-liked person. He used charm and manipulation to
I think there's also introverted serial killer.
everyone in his life, as well as his victims. These recently released photos of Ted show a different side of the maniac that we've all come to know. Additionally, most of them have horrifying backstories.
Like,
Number 5. In 1969, a beautiful young woman named Elizabeth Kendall met Ted Bundy. He was nothing more than a handsome face with a charming smile when she stumbled across him. He'd not yet
Bundy has a long hair. I didn't know that.
embarked on his crime spree, and although many signs of a psychopath were probably present, there's no way she could have known, considering the friendly demeanor that Ted shared with the outside world. The pair became heavily romantically involved and eventually went on to officially date. Elizabeth had a daughter named Molly, and in some of her later reports, she explains that she was desperate to find a solid father figure for her child, and she thought that that could have been Ted.
So this
As
is
far
Molly.
as she has always described, Ted was never violent or disrespectful to her daughter or herself in any way. The trio came together, and Molly actually grew very close to Ted. Although they weren't the traditional idea of a family unit at the time, both Molly and Elizabeth described that their home life was happy, normal, and just as real as any other.
Okay.
In 1972, Elizabeth got pregnant,
But what went wrong with Ted Bundy?
and Ted was overjoyed to father his own child, in addition to Molly, who he adored. However, Elizabeth felt that they weren't ready for a second child at the time due to big changes that they planned to go through when Ted started attending law school. Ted supported her, but apparently it was very heartbroken that such a decision had to be made. Either way, it didn't change how happy their current family status was. This photo shows how young Molly played with Ted's hair as he lays on the couch and shines a huge smile at the camera.
Okay.
The photo was taken in 1975, meaning that Ted had already started growing his victim count. It's disturbing to see how delighted and comfortable Molly was with Ted, completely unaware of his dirty deeds. Most stories of Ted's personal life can make viewers question their own trust of certain people in their lives. If one man could play the role of a devoted father and passionate husband, all while taking the lives of innocent victims, who's to say that no one else can? When speaking on the photo, Molly
Yeah, no one can tell what one mind is thinking.
shared in an interview that she adored Ted and felt like he gave her and her mother what they needed to have a real family.
Number 4.
Number 4.
Okay. Man, this numbering is long.
This photo gives us insight on behalf of Elizabeth, who later shared her concerns with police and ultimately the public. It was taken during a trip to Utah in 1975. Liz smiles at the camera, clearly displaying the love and happiness that Ted brings to her in a simple moment, like taking a photo. Ted, with an arm wrapped around Liz, sticks out his tongue and makes a funny face at the camera. Looking at the expression now, knowing what we all know, he looks a little crazy, but at the time, this is probably a funny and heartwarming moment.
Okay. So he's very cunning and persuasive at that time.
Unbeknownst to anyone else at the time, Ted had already begun his crime spree by this point, with his first attacks occurring about a year prior. Aside from this dark fact, there's a more disturbing story that comes alongside this photo, in the form of Liz's later statements regarding it. She said that this was around the time that she started finding concerning items around the house and in Ted's car, such as women's clothing, lingerie, makeup items, and a pair of crutches, which were just to name a few. Of course, it goes without saying that her immediate assumption was that Ted was cheating on her. However, she also had heard horrible crimes going on in which women were going missing and later were found to have had their lives taken. At some point, she may have
But it is actually her husband.
reported these findings to local police, but seeing as they assumed that an affair was going on, she was mostly dismissed. In fact, she wasn't taken seriously at all until the tables turned, when Ted was arrested and the cops were now coming to her for information. She still complied and offered everything that she knew. She made a statement in which she described that Ted had told her he was completely overtaken by his sinister urges and felt like he was fighting a losing battle against, as he called it, the Force. He also confessed to her that he was trying to hide his true self and put on a character to live a normal life or to be a normal man. Although Liz didn't mention this, many suspect that this photo worsened Liz's guilt and regret because she was completely fooled by Ted's act and could have saved many women if she'd only paid more attention. As it's been mentioned before though, psychopaths are able to manipulate and trick almost anyone they come into contact with. Therefore, as Ted was wearing a real boy mask, there was no way of knowing that he was truly a monster in disguise.
No one can know. So he started to fake personality at that time. That's pretty interesting.
These two photos might not seem all that different, but they represent very different points of time in Ted's life. The first photo was taken in 1971 and was captured by Liz, described as an unhappy Ted who just woke up from a nap. He sits at the edge of the couch and glares at the camera with a sour expression.
I mean, the picture doesn't mean anything.
Hair is tousled about as you'd expect after a deep nap, and his overall energy seems low to say the least. Although it was taken about 3 years before his crime spree began, the image shows signs of Ted's mental disturbance that he was beginning to have trouble hiding.
Really? I don't think you could tell that from pictures.
After his arrest, Ted was put under the care of psychiatrist Dr. Dorothy Lewis. She was hired to evaluate Ted and offer some counseling to establish how competent he would be on trial. Dr. Lewis later stated that she believed Ted may have bipolar disorder, which causes dramatic mood swings, horrible sleeping habits, signs of differing personality traits, and of course, outbursts. That statement relates back to this photo because the image shows how Ted may have been struggling with mood swings and unhealthy sleeping habits long before his true nature began. The second nap photo shared in this series is starkly different from the first. It shows Ted staring at the camera lens with wide, very alert eyes, despite the fact that he'd just woken up from a nap at Liz's
Really very alert eyes. His eyes were all red.
childhood home. It was taken in 1974 when the heinous crimes he would someday become infamous for had already begun. Liz reported that around this time she started to take notice of small yet concerning changes in Ted's behavior. One prime example was his sleep schedule. Although it was never completely stable or at most considered normal, it became even worse after his crimes. He apparently only slept for very short periods of time and often complained that the sleep that he was getting wasn't helpful to his overall state. He also started to show more signs of mania, such as participating in risky behavior, being drastically more spontaneous, starting many projects at a time without ever finishing them, and having communication issues. All of these were signs of bipolar disorder that he would later be diagnosed with. However, they also could have been results of Ted's worsening stress brought on by living a double life.
Yep. I still don't know what
Number
led to
2.
him killing.
A lesser-known fact about Ted Bundy is that he was actually a heavy drinker. He
Really?
frequently had a beer or bottle on his
Most of the serial killers are drinkers.
person, but in his normal life, he hid his possible drinking problem very well. It didn't seem to get out of control until it came to his crimes. According to his own reports, Ted would often get very drunk before going out on the prowl. He explained that he did this to loosen up and let his dominant personality, the one that he showed to the public, be taken over by his evil side. His issues with consumption were commonly discussed in his court hearings. The defense tried to argue that Ted should not have been tried as competent for his crimes because he was often under the influence of not only drugs but prescription medications as well. The crime that finally brought Ted's spree to a stopping point occurred on January 15, 1978. Heavily intoxicated, Ted broke into a sorority house located in Florida. We can't discuss what he did after breaking into the house because the facts are too graphic.
Yeah.
But by the end of the outburst,
Those graphics were horrible.
he'd taken the lives of 3 female victims and seriously injured 3 others. The survivors were rushed to the hospital, and in the midst of their recovery, they were able to describe Ted in great detail, and so he was eventually apprehended.
Yeah.
Again, the defense team working for Ted tried to argue that he wasn't in a clear mental state during his crimes, due to the various substances. The same story was used in the 4-day
I think he's in a very active state of mind
trial
at that time.
several times. In fact, on one day of the trial, it was discovered that Ted's newest love interest and partner, Carol Boone, had somehow smuggled in a drink for Ted. It's unclear if this photo is from the same day, but reports suggest that it is. Taken on the steps of the courthouse in 1980, it shows a more rugged-looking Ted throwing back a cold one. What makes the photo even more bizarre is that his feet are actually shackled, meaning that he was still in custody. Despite his clear consumption during various days of his trial and nearly every night he carried out his crimes, Ted was still declared competent enough for trial. About 9 years after this photo, Ted faced his fate and he was buckled into the chair at Florida State Prison.
Okay. Right, here comes the number one.
Number 1.
Okay.
For someone that knows nothing about Ted Bundy, this photo might just look like a still shot of a happy-go-lucky guy enjoying his time outdoors. For those that have learned even just a few details of his heinous crimes though, this photo is quite unsettling. It was taken by Ted's former significant
Why is the photo unsettling though?
other, Elizabeth Kendall, in 1970. The family had ventured on a trip to the Pacific Northwest, which is full of uncharted wilderness, wildlife, and pure beauty of Mother Nature. According to Liz, Ted loved the region for a variety of reasons and always wanted to camp out in the deserted areas of a forest, even just for one night. Again,
It seems he's a very impulsive guy.
and it would seem like Ted had found some innocent peace in such a location, where he could travel and create lovely memories with his family. Later in his life though, around 1974, sites just like this one would become Ted's dumping grounds. Throughout 1974, Ted took the lives of at least 7 female victims. He frequented the areas of Olympia and Seattle where he would lure his victims to his car, usually parked somewhere deep in the woods, by sporting an arm sling and putting on his most charming mask. It's both disturbing and ironic to see his smiling face in the mountainous area that he would soon contaminate with the remains of his victims.
Jeez. That's it. That's actually the
Thank you
scary
guys
part.
so much.
Okay, that was a great video. Very nice narration. Yeah, I don't think you could tell someone is bad or not by just looking at the pictures. You have to live with them for 24 hours to know that perfectly, or even a year. Maybe even then you won't even know anything at all about that guy. That's actually pretty scary. But you can know about like 50% if you live with him for one day. So let me know down in the comments what other videos would you like me to react to next. If you want to check out all my recommended and recommend using video, check out the affiliate links below which carry a small commission but no extra cost to you. So don't hesitate to comment what you thought about this video. I'm gonna end the video, then make sure to subscribe to the channel, get more subscriber, hit that bell notification so you don't miss any uploads. Like the video to type out YouTube to recommend this video to many people around the world, and share this video with your friends, family and relatives, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.